Welcome back, Wednesday, January 19th, 2022. I am Seth Leibson, live from the Guns Etc. studio. And we have Chris Llewellyn, Vice President of All Things Important, sitting in for Bill today in the producer's chair. Good to have you, Chris. We'll do a check-in with you in a few moments. Thanks for doing this. Phone number 602-508-0960. Joe Biden is concluding his, second full press conference with the White House press corps of his presidency. We had, this would be so Barack Obama and Donald Trump each had over 20 by this time in their presidency. This is Joe Biden's second. I can see why. Everyone can see why. The questions were interesting, and I will talk to you about them in a moment, but let me just point out something Joe Concha has pointed out. There was not a single question on violent crime. There was not a single question on the border crisis and fentanyl deaths now being the leading cause of death between those 18 to 49. There were a lot of things not asked. The big issue, and I think the big takeaway from this press conference will be what he said about Russia. He probably has his national security staff right now pulling their hair out if they have doused the fire that he lit on it in the first place. He gave a green light to Vladimir Putin on invading the Ukraine. U.S. President Joe Biden predicted on Thursday, I'm reading from a Reuters report, U.S. President Joe Biden predicted on Thursday that Russian President Vladimir Putin will make a move into Ukraine. But a full-scale invasion would trigger a massive response that would be costly for Russia and its economy. My guess is he will move in, Biden said. He has to do something. Do I think he'll test the West, test the United States and NATO as significantly as he can? Yes, I think he will. He is giving Vladimir Putin a green light to test NATO and the United States and to go in to the Ukraine. He went further. He said Russia will be held accountable if it invades, but it depends on what he does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion. I'm quoting your President of the United States directly. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and we end up having to fight about what to do and not to do. But if they actually do what they're capable of doing, it's going to be a disaster for Russia. If they're going to do what they're capable of doing, Russia's capable of annihilation. Let me repeat to you what he said. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and we end up having to fight about what to do and not to do. Who's the we? Who's going to have to end up fighting and discussing what to do and not to do? Joe Biden and his advisors? Joe Biden and NATO? Joe Biden and the allies? Ukraine used to think it was an ally. And Joe Biden says, my guess is he will move in, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion. One commentator said, so we're basically now in favor of mostly peaceful incursions. He did get a follow-up from two different reporters. They tried to help him correct the record. He was asked again by Reuters if he was giving Putin a green light for a small incursion. Joe Biden laughed, and he said it did sound like that, didn't it? But then rather than doing the obvious thing and straightening it out, he went on to a monologue on the importance of keeping NATO together. It gave Putin a further green light. There's an easy answer if he were serious and if he were thinking as to how to handle that question, saying it did sound like that, didn't it? That's not what it was meant to communicate. We will not tolerate any incursion into Ukraine, and the response will be proportionate. That's what I meant. That's all he had to say. That's all he had to say. The response will be proportionate. He could have spoken like Donald Trump. He could have said the response will be disproportionate. He could have done that. He could have put a little fear in Russia's leadership. He didn't. He didn't say any of that. He laughed and gave a lecture on NATO. CNN tried it again, tried to lift him out of this mistake again. CNN asked a question, a follow-up on this. And Biden said, the only thing I know for sure is that the decision is Putin's and what side of the bed he gets up on. All of this is Putin's. Do you realize what a resignation of status and power that is for the United States president to say the decision is entirely Putin's? I don't know how many took poli-sci courses in this audience, or how many took, majors or steep or deep studies in foreign policy. But there's a word here. There's a word about which probably 20,000 books have been written, if not more. The word is called deterrence. Deterrence. Does anyone remember what deterrence is? It has guided every piece of foreign policy since George Washington was president. How do we deter an enemy or a competitor or even an ally from doing something we don't want them to do? We do not say, and have never said except in one other time I can think of, we do not say and have never said it's their decision. It's entirely up to them, and I think they'll do it, which is what Joe Biden said to Vladimir Putin. The only other close thing I can think of is when Joe Biden's erstwhile boss, Barack Obama, farmed out the Syria problem to Russia and Vladimir Putin. How do we put up with this? People ask me, how is it that he even gets elected? How is he even getting 33% or any percent approval? Well, don't underestimate what people don't pay attention to. Think about it this way. If you listen to this show, or any show on talk radio for that matter, or if you tune in to your favorite news channel, I don't care what it is, you are probably in the 90th percentile of information about politics in America. Most of the country does not pay attention to this. Most of the country is under the grips of what sociologist Philip Reith called the triumph of the therapeutic. What is the triumph of the therapeutic? It's that we are now in a psychological era. A psychological era that cares more about how we feel than what we think. Philip Reith put it this way: whether or not a monarch or a mass leader has great executive ability or power, modern politics suggests that his primary function may well be psychological. He acts as a center around which otherwise disturbed lives can be organized. Now, you look at what the left has put this country through, even under Donald Trump. You look at what the left has put this country through when it comes to COVID and everything from there. You look at what the left has put this country through when it came to riots. You look at what the country has what this country has been put through by the left when it comes not just to riots and not just to COVID, but when it comes to every little statement that Donald Trump made and the thousands of lies they complained about him making and continually reiterated that he said. Joe Biden has beaten that number and beaten that record. You look at what the left has put this country through, and Joe Biden comes here and makes them feel better. Why? Because they don't have to deal with Donald Trump. And it has nothing to do with accomplishments. If it had to do with accomplishments, Joe Biden would have been asked about violent crime. He would have been asked about the border crisis. He would have been asked about fentanyl deaths. He would have been asked about how come more people have died on his watch than previously. He would have been asked about Afghanistan. He would have been asked about stopping the flow of illegal immigrants along with the fentanyl that's coming across the border. He would have been asked more questions about inflation with strong follow-ups. He would have been asked about energy independence. He would have been asked a whole lot of other questions. Now, while I think Russia will be the headline, it is interesting that the press tried again and again and again to rehabilitate him on his Russia answer. I can understand why they'd want to, but understand what the press is doing here, avoiding all the serious questions. Joe Biden said something interesting about Republicans, too. He was asked about working with Republicans, and I'll tell you what he said when we come back.